What makes something great? When looking at the definition of great, we can look at it from its adjective form, noun form, or the adverb form. However, we colloquially think of the adverb form, which means excellently or very well. However, when it comes to nouns, we usually see as an important or distinguished person, but also great can be used for things, food, people, and even giant monsters. When I want to talk about what makes Godzilla so great, it isn't necessarily about just the things that I enjoy about the series or even what the monster stands for. It's essentially an immense line of history that starts all the way back in our own history outside of its own creation. When we look at the past, sometimes we get lost in trying to discover what was it that made people do things. We think about, obviously, the great wonders of the world, like Stonehenge. We also think about things like the pyramids, even. However, when we look into modern times, it's usually lost as we think we've done everything. Everything that's happened can be done already, and there's not as many frontiers as there is to be broken anymore. As many people have already gotten there, and we're just waiting to get there ourselves. But sometimes you can reinvent the message, or sometimes a new horizon is forged by the actions that we do and the new things that we have done. When I think about what the inspiration for Godzilla is, it's somewhat amazing but somewhat heartbreaking, as you have to understand how people must have felt once the Second World War came to an end, and those that were in the country of Japan had to go back and fix their lives. In some ways, it felt like a monster was always on their back, as after their government had effectively dissolved to a degree and the country had split for the most part, as a lot of people, unfortunately, and towns and cities had been burned. Generations of people had been lost, and unfortunately, the atomic weapons that were used devastated two cities, making them uninhabitable for a while. As we in the world had broken a new forward position and changed history forever. And when it comes to something like Godzilla, it's a representation of our own malice, our own inability to understand the unknown, but also an ability to understand that we have to be sympathetic. As even if we look at the original story and how it ends in the original movie, we can see so much of people's care, believe it or not, in it. And that although you watch the city being destroyed, you watch the hubris of people thinking that they've obviously killed Godzilla by bombing him, and then the deployment of the military to stop him failing, you can see that underneath everything, what matters is people caring. Whether it's Dr. Serizawa understanding that he's created a weapon that could devastate the entire planet, whether it is in our different various characters. And if you watch the American version, which most people may have seen, when you see Raymond Burr's character, you see the care of a person trying to uncover the truth and what it is that leads us to cause such havoc among other people. Or whether it's the shots of citizens in the different field hospitals being tended for and cared for after the radiations affected them and hurt them after Godzilla's wake. There's a lot to be desired as you start to wonder what makes something great. And you start to see that maybe it's not always about grandeur or something about being positive. Maybe something great can come from looking at what's negative and making sure that we don't do it again. Also, forging an alliance or forging our own path forward together through the sadness and maybe the pain of what happens when you do something bad or someone else does something bad that hurts you, but ultimately you have to take responsibility in order to try to stop it. I think that all of these messages are a part of, I think, the entire Godzilla series. Whether or not some people want to believe it or some people just like to see giant monsters fight back and forth, I was also in that aspect too. But I really want to bring that aspect to those who maybe see this video and are wondering maybe what is it that you wanted to hear when you clicked on this video? Were you expecting me to just kind of go on about how it's amazing, sci-fi, dinosaurs, radiation, monsters, space, all these different elements, but they all are tied together by the central theme of taking care of things. And yes, people could change what they think. It's just after watching -1, and I originally had watched the first Godzilla a while back, and after watching most of the series, I think it gets lost, obviously, in how they wanted to make the movie series continue. But in the end, most of the characters have the recurring theme of taking care of something. I think about one of the more commonly watched ones I've seen as of recently is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, the first Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. When we see that our main character, although is trying to uncover the truth because they work for the government, they're still trying to take care of other people, take care of the situation. And even in the sequel, Terror Mechagodzilla, our characters are still trying to take care of everybody else. They really just want to keep, Titanosaurus originally from harming other people and, harming submarines. And eventually we see that they just want to end up helping even their unknown enemy in the form of Dr. Why is my mind blanking on him at the moment? But Dr. What? It's not Fujiyama, but Mifune. And Dr. Mifune's daughter, who ends up technically being a villain, but not really, as it's more of Dr. Mifune in his blind anger and rage, who originally wanted to take care of his daughter, didn't realize that he was creating a bigger monster disaster for the world. So I really think that when we talk about why Godzilla is so great, there are so many things that actually pop into it. However, most people might just laugh it off or not take it as seriously. That might also be because of, I would say, the very subpar dubbing that was done for a lot of the Godzilla films into the West. I do think if you watch some of them in their original dubbing, it does, or the original subtitled and dubbing, you do understand a bit more with the seriousness and more of the way that people were trying to carry it down with what they were trying to get across. Yes, there is like goofy moments and humor sprinkled into it, but when it comes to certain films, you have to have some type of bright point, I think, that needs to happen in it. Even in something like -1, which I'm not going to give a full review for right now, but just to explain, this is one of those key tenets, I think, that we have to have. Because some of these movies, especially like -1 and the original, have such dark premises where they're starting from and such an amount of pain that is associated with watching them that they do need positive elements to look forward to. People are celebrating the fact that it's after World War II in the original film, and they're trying to move on with their life. And even in something like -1, our main character is trying to figure out if he's able to move on from his past. Is he able to be happy as other people are trying to rebuild the shambles of their own lives as well? So much has kind of compiled into the Godzilla films. And even with the MonsterVerse, I think that's also a theme that happens. I think about the first Godzilla of 2014, Bryan Cranston's character, although he was not really the main character, although I was hoping he kind of would be, he himself is in a situation of loss, pain from his wife passing, and he really wants to know the truth. But his son ends up being in his focal point. He wants to take care of his father. He wants to love his father. He wants his father to be in his life. So ultimately, that dynamic is there in that film, and even for the films going on. I think in something like Skull Island, it's lost a little, but there's also the theme of, humans, or even Samuel L. Jackson's character, I think portrays a very good idea of what we tried to stop, or what we would hope to stop in the future, which is trying to dominate nature. By trying to dominate nature, we usually end up biting it, because nature is not controlled by anyone. It simply happens. So that's another element in itself. I do think that retribution is also something that gets chalked up into the Godzilla film, as a lot of times we look at Godzilla as a manifestation of a punished world, a harmed world by humans. even in the latest incarnation in something like -1, you wonder if, Godzilla is the manifestation of revenge, pain, suffering of different things, whether it's nature, people, and they kind of manifest into a monster that comes back to bite you in the butt almost. It's something like GMK Godzilla, which is my favorite iteration. It does carry the weight of taking it seriously, because Godzilla is not meant to be trifled with. Because the moment he appears, appears in his full grandeur, he immediately goes to work on what he's supposed to do. And that could be a god of destruction almost appearance, or a visage of the end, like the apocalypse coming, and it happens to be dinosaur shaped with two wide eyes and breathes atomic fire. I think more of what I'm trying to get here is, in this video, what makes Godzilla so great is a myriad of things. I don't think it's simply one thing. I don't think it's just how ridiculous the premise may seem at first. It's not just the great writings at times and the great series that's gone on, and even the long legacy of the history. I think it's more so the ability for this series specifically to continue to speak to different generations of human beings so far, even though its window of life has technically been short, although it's very long, as the original Godzilla came out in 1954. And 1 year from now, it'll have been 70 years. So that's rather impressive, I may say. And ultimately, if anyone was to ask me what makes the Godzilla or the G-Man great, I could simply tell them to take a look for themselves. This is Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there, to sign on.